There is a type of man that history keeps producing. No matter the century, no matter the culture, no matter what women say they want. He is not the most responsible man in the room, not the most faithful. He will charm you and vanish by morning. He is morally inconsistent and fundamentally unreliable. And yet, women have fought duels over him, defied their fathers for him, abandoned perfectly good marriages for him, and spent the rest of their lives unable to forget him. His name, throughout history, is the Rake. Now I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a cautionary tale, something your mother warned you about, something society has agreed, with considerable enthusiasm, to condemn. But here is what is interesting about that condemnation. It has never once slowed him down. Not in ancient Greece, not in Renaissance Italy, not in the court of Versailles, not in 20th century Hollywood. 4,000 years of recorded human history, and the Rake keeps appearing, keeps succeeding, keeps leaving a trail of extraordinary women in his wake. That does not happen by accident, and it does not happen because women are foolish. It happens because the Rake is offering something real. Today we are going to examine that something. Two of the most remarkable Rakes in recorded history. The psychology of why this archetype works when by every rational account it should not. And the underlying principles, whether you want to deploy them or simply recognize when they are being used on you. Let us begin. The year is 1710. The court of Louis XIV. The king is old, miserable, and insufferably religious. He has made sure everyone around him shares at least two of those qualities. The grandeur of Versailles has curdled into something suffocating, the kind of place where ambition calcifies and desire goes to die. Into this grey, breathless world arrives a 15-year-old boy. His name is Fronsac. He will one day be known as the Duke de Richelieu. But right now, he is simply a boy. Impudent, charming, and possessed of a quality that cannot be inherited or purchased. He was alive, in a room full of the dead. The ladies of the court noticed immediately. They played with him like a toy, treated him with the affectionate condescension that beautiful women extend to beautiful boys. They were amused, charmed, and then he kissed them. Not with the tentative uncertainty of inexperience, with the confident, wandering hands of a man who had already decided where this was going. Think about what that communicates. A boy, 15 years old, in the most politically treacherous court in Europe. And he is not adjusting himself to the room is adjusting to him. One duchess found this more alarming than charming. The king was furious. The boy was thrown into the Bastille. And here is where it gets interesting. The ladies of the court, women who had everything, surrounded by the most powerful men in France, began to grieve his absence. Not discreetly, openly. They lobbied for his release. They missed him the way you miss sunlight when it disappears behind a cloud. What they had in that boy was something they could not find anywhere else in that enormous palace. Not boldness exactly, not beauty, something rarer. They had someone who was genuinely, uncontrollably, unapologetically there. He gets out. Years pass. He becomes a man, and then a legend. Now pay close attention to the mechanics of what follows, because seduction is not magic. It is psychology. And psychology has structure. A young woman named Mademoiselle de Valois is walking in a Paris park with her chaperone. Her father has attached to his daughter a woman of impeccable virtue and iron vigilance. The mission: keep the wolves away until the girl can be safely married off. In the park, de Valois sees a young man. He does not approach, does not speak, does not introduce himself. He simply looks at her. But the look, her chaperone tells her who it is: the infamous Duke de Richelieu. Blasphemer, heartbreaker, someone to avoid at all cost. Of course it is. Days later, a different park, and there he is again, this time in disguise, dressed as a beggar. But even in that disguise, the look in his eye was unmistakable. She returned his gaze, because here at last was something real in a life made entirely of careful, curated dullness. Given her father's sternness, no man had dared approach her, and now this notorious courtier was pursuing her. Not the other women at court, her. Then come the letters, burning with desire, a bold proposal. She agrees, half playing, thinking it can never actually happen. She did not understand who she was dealing with. One evening, her chambermaid comes in carrying her night clothes. The maid looks back at de Valois and smiles. It is Richelieu, dressed as the maid. Inside the house, in her bedroom. While the chaperone sits in the next room knitting, completely unaware. De Valois nearly gasps. She catches herself. If she screams, her family finds out about the letters. About her own participation. She is already implicated. She goes to her room, intending to reason with him. She cannot. His words, his presence, the absolute audacity of what he has done, the danger of the moment, every carefully prepared thought dissolved in the heat of what was actually happening around her. While the chaperone knitted peacefully next door, the Duke initiated her into a world she had never known. Her father grows suspicious, fires the chaperone, doubles the precautions, rebuilds every wall. Richelieu responds by buying the house next door, under an assumed name, and then secretly tunneling a passage through the wall between the two buildings. Let that sink in. This man, with options, one of the most sought-after figures in Paris, did not shrug and move to an easier target. He bought a house. He dug a tunnel. Over several months. Not because he had to, but because to the Rake, an obstacle is not a deterrent. It is an invitation. Everyone in Paris eventually knew his stories. That was by design. Women competed for his attention. To be ignored by him became a source of social anxiety. One aristocrat of the era reportedly said she had never seen a woman manage even the slightest resistance to him. Not that resistance was difficult, that it simply did not seem to happen. That is an extraordinary thing to observe about any human being. Now I want to tell you about a very different kind of Rake. Because Richelieu had youth, title, and animal presence, he was by all accounts remarkably beautiful. Our next subject had none of that. It is the early 1880s. Rome. High society. A young journalist named Gabriele D'Annunzio is circulating in the upper echelons of Italian aristocracy. He is short, stocky, dark, splotchy complexion, slightly bulging eyes, unattractive by any conventional standard. The aristocratic men of Rome paid him no attention. He was a gossip reporter, a social climber beneath their notice. They let him mingle freely with their wives and daughters. They were not worried. They should have been terrified. Because within minutes of being alone with any of these women, something remarkable happened. They were spellbound. First, there was the voice. Not merely pleasant, something beyond pleasant. Women compared it to church bells in the distance. Musical in its rhythm, each syllable articulated with the care of a man who understood that words are not simply sounds. They are instruments. He seemed to know each woman's hidden wound. The duchess who feared she was unimpressive. He called her a goddess of nature. The woman who believed she could have been an artist. He told her she was an incomparable creator the world had not yet recognized. The romantic who felt trapped inside a life of obligation. He spoke to her as though she had stepped out of a novel. That night, those women would lie awake trying to recall exactly what he had said. They couldn't reconstruct it. Nothing specific, nothing concrete thing. Just a feeling. The feeling that, perhaps for the first time, they had been genuinely seen. The next morning, a poem would arrive. Written, apparently, specifically for her. Tailored to everything she had shared and everything she had not said but clearly felt. What she did not know was that he wrote dozens of those poems, slightly adjusted for each recipient. The same emotional architecture, the same mechanics. Deployed with the precision of a craftsman who has done this so many times that the process has become invisible. As his conquests multiplied, his reputation became self-generating. He attracted great artists. The legendary dancer Isadora Duncan described his effect on women in a way that captures something essential. She said he was small, bald, and ugly when his face was still. But when he spoke to a woman he found interesting, his entire face transformed, and the woman he was speaking to felt her very soul lifted. Her soul, not her curiosity, her soul. During World War I, this 52-year-old man joined the army with zero prior military experience. He learned to fly, led dangerous missions, became Italy's most decorated war hero. After the war, he raised a private army and marched on the disputed city of Fiume. When a general intercepted him and threatened to shoot him, D'Annunzio opened his coat to display his medals and said, in effect, "If you must shoot me, fire on those first." The general broke into tears and joined him. This is what happens when the Rake fully inhabits what he is. The seduction extends beyond women. It becomes a force that can move history. Now let us talk about why this works. Women live under a very specific kind of pressure. They are expected to be the civilizing force, the moral anchor, expected to want commitment, loyalty, safety, stability. And many of them genuinely do want those things. But those things are not the whole story. Because underneath those socially sanctioned desires, there is something else. Something that does not get spoken about at dinner parties. Something sitting quietly in the basement of the self. The desire for something intense, unrepeatable. Something that demands nothing from you except your presence in this single electrified moment. The Rake is the answer to that repressed longing. He does not offer a future. He offers something rarer, total, burning, undivided presence. When Richelieu pursued a woman, there was no calculation she could detect. There was only the blazing reality of his desire for her, right now, in this moment. For that moment, she was everything, not one of many obligations, not a priority competing with other priorities, everything. You cannot produce that feeling by being sensible. It requires a man who has set everything else aside and oriented himself completely in your direction. That bypasses every defense she has built. The defenses were built against calculation, against being used, against being one item on someone else's list, not against someone who has made you the list. Here is the dilemma the Rake solves beautifully. To seduce someone, you must plan. You must think several moves ahead. But the moment your target senses that calculation, the moment she feels like a chess piece on your board, the game collapses. The Rake sidesteps this entirely. Yes, he plans. He finds out where the guarded woman walks. He figures out how to get past the chaperone. He writes the letter that will land with maximum impact. But when he is with her, none of that shows. Because his desire is genuinely real. He is not performing emotion. He is consumed by it. The planning is invisible. The desire is completely, embarrassingly visible. And because the desire is so clearly real, she cannot see the architecture behind it. She sees only the feeling. And she responds to the feeling. That is the genius. 5 laws. Every Rake in history has operated by these, whether consciously or not. The first law. Intensity of desire has its own logic. When someone wants you with a fervor that overrides their common sense, when a man is buying adjacent houses and digging tunnels just to be near you, rational analysis of his character becomes nearly impossible. Intensity does not argue. It does not persuade. It overwhelms. This is why the mild, careful man who is reasonable about his feelings is so often overlooked. Not because he is less worthy, but because his presence demands nothing. And what demands nothing tends to be valued as nothing. The second law. Words are a technology. D'Annunzio understood that words are not a delivery system for information. They are instruments capable of doing things to the listener that have nothing to do with the literal content of what is being said. Most men use language to transmit facts. The Rake uses it to produce states. That is a categorically different skill, and it is learnable. The third law. Resistance is not a wall. It is a door. Every Rake understands this. A man who encounters difficulty and redirects to an easier option is transmitting a message. You are worth exactly the minimum required to have you. A man who encounters difficulty and escalates is transmitting something entirely different. You have become important enough that no obstacle is sufficient reason to stop. That communication bypasses analysis. It goes straight to the part of us that needs to know whether we matter. The fourth law: reputation is a gravitational field. The Rake never apologizes for what he is. He lets the stories circulate, sometimes circulates them himself. To be chosen by the Rake becomes a distinction, not despite his history with other women, but because of it. If all those women found him so compelling, they risked everything for a moment with him, then either something is wrong with all of them, or there is something genuinely extraordinary about him. Most people will not conclude that something is wrong with all of them. Reputation does seduction work before he has even entered the room. The fifth law: never retreat from what you are. The Rake is unrepentantly himself. He has no interest in your approval of him, and that indifference, maddening, paradoxical, is exactly what makes your approval so desperately sought. We want what does not need us. We pursue what does not require our pursuit. This is not a weakness of character. It is a feature of desire, and the Rake understands it at the bone level. What brings the Rake down? Women are historically remarkable in their forgiveness of him. Men are not. Men who cannot achieve what the Rake achieves will feel something when they observe him, something they will dress up in the language of morality or social concern. Underneath that dressing is something much simpler: envy. The Rake threatens the comfortable fiction that if you follow the rules, you get the reward. He breaks every rule, collects every reward. So his enemies attack, through institutions, through gossip, through moral crusades. The Rake's best defense is not to retreat into respectability. That damages the very quality that makes him what he is. The best defense is to accept this as the price of admission. The hatred of small men is not a verdict on your character. It is a compliment paid in the only currency that envy knows. Carry it with dignity. Keep going. Let me leave you with what gets missed most often. People look at Richelieu and D'Annunzio and see manipulation, dark arts, something beyond ordinary men. But the Rake is not primarily a master of tactics. He is a master of presence. What every woman who encountered Richelieu experienced, what every woman who fell beneath D'Annunzio's voice experienced, was the rare and electrifying sensation of being completely and fully met. Not assessed, not tolerated, not managed. Met. With the full force of another person's attention and appetite, without apology, without reserve. In a world full of distracted, half-present men who are always slightly elsewhere, always slightly holding something back. A man who shows up with his entire self, desire and all, without asking permission, is a phenomenon. He will not build you a careful future. He will not pretend otherwise, but he will make you feel, for the time he is there, that you are the only real thing in the room. And that feeling is something most people will spend their entire lives chasing and almost never find. The Rake does not give you what society says you should want. He gives you what you actually feel. And in that gap, between the should and the feel, between the sanctioned and the authentic, that is exactly where his power lives. So, the next time someone tells you people want the safe, reliable, reasonable option, remember the ladies of Versailles who lobbied for the release of a 15-year-old boy from the Bastille. Remember the aristocratic women of Rome spellbound by a short, ugly journalist before their husbands had time to be alarmed. Remember the general who was supposed to shoot him, who broke into tears instead. The question is not whether to be the Rake. That is a more complicated conversation. The question is simpler. Do you understand what the Rake is actually offering? Because until you do, until you can look at those stories and see the real exchange happening beneath the surface, you are operating in the dark. And the Rake never operates in the dark. Thank you for listening.